Hello and welcome back to the Joyful Soul Creates. Charlotte here, and today I'm going to be showing you 6 ways to use small stamps, and I'm using the Spring Motifs stamp set from Skull and Cross Buns for this. This video has actually taken me several weeks, if not months, to get finished, so it's not really spring anymore, but the techniques still apply to other small stamp sets anyway, so hopefully that doesn't matter too much. So my first card I'm showing just using one of the small stamps on its own, but first I'm creating a background to go behind my little stamp, and for that I'm doing some ink smooshing using Distress Oxides first. I have Squeezed Lemonade and then Wild Honey, so I'm making a kind of orangey yellow background. And when I do these kinds of backgrounds, I start with my lightest colour, so the Squeezed Lemonade, put that onto my craft mat, spritz it with water. My water has a little Perfect Pearls in it, which adds a bit of shimmer, and I want the lightest colour to cover the widest area, so I have most of that. And then as I go a step darker in the colour, so in this case Wild Honey, I'm doing slightly less, so it's covering less of the area. With smooshing, you can combine Distress Oxides and Distress inks. So for my third colour, I'm using Spiced Marmalade Distress ink, because I don't have that in Distress Oxides. I only have very limited colours of Distress inks and Distress Oxides. And then for my darkest colour, which will cover the smallest area, I'm using Tea Dye Distress ink, and I do dry between every single layer. Once I'm happy with that and it's completely dry, I put the card base into my MISTI and I stamped my icon, which is the bee from the Spring Motifs, and also I did add the little trail from the bee, so technically I have used 2 of the little stamps here, but the technique still applies. It would work just as well with just the bee. I also stamped a sentiment from Quirky Sentiment stamp set, and then I'm going to be colouring in my bee just very quickly with some alcohol markers, and I always show the caps on screen. And also for the wings, to lighten those up, I just painted them with a little water to reactivate the Distress ink, and then picked it up with a paper towel to make those lighter. And then as a final touch, I added some Nuvo drops in Limoncello to finish off that first card. The second way you can use your tiny stamps on a card is to create a row of them. So again, I'm making a 1-layer card, and I'll start by stamping my sentiment, which is again from Quirky Sentiments, and I use Altenew Midnight Violet ink. I'm then adding 3 of the little flowers in other purple Altenew inks. And when you're making a row like this, it's a good idea to work in odd numbers. 3 works brilliantly, as does 5. To fill out the design just a little bit, I added some Nuvo drops. I used purple ones in alternating positions between the flowers, and then I also used Simply White as the centres of the flowers, and that completes the second card. That one was a very quick and simple design. The third technique you can do with these tiny stamps is to build a scene. This will of course vary depending on what the particular stamp set you are using is, but with this stamp set, for example, it does come with buildable flowers, so there are stems and leaves and flower heads. So I just worked through using those to build up a scene of flowers in the corner of my card base. I've also stamped a sentiment which is from the Spring Sentiment stamp set. It says Hello Spring. And here again I'm using my Spectrum Noir Illustrator markers to do the colouring, and I'll go through this quite quickly. I obviously did yellows for the daffodil heads, and I worked from darkest to lightest. I didn't put too much attention into where the shadows are exactly, but just as long as everything had some kind of consistent shadow and highlights. I used the same yellows for the centre of my daisies. Initially I wasn't going to choose the darkest shade, but I decided I would because I felt it needed that contrast. I also wasn't planning on adding any colour to the petals of the flowers, but I realised they did need something, so I used a very light ivory colour as the shadow and just blended it out with my blender pen. Then I'm using greens to colour the stems and the leaves, again working from my darkest shade through to my lightest shade. The stems really are very narrow, so a little bit tricky to get that shading into, so I mostly did it that the shadow was under the flowers and at the very bottom, and then the highlights more in the center area of the stems. After finishing all my colouring, I decided to add some stippled spots or dots into the background using the same shades of green that I had used to colour the stems and leaves. I thought this would help fill out the design and kind of give the impression that there is more depth to this scene, like there's more leaves and grass in the background of the design. And once I was happy with that, that completed my third card. The fourth way you can use small stamps is to create a wreath. Typically you might think of using flowers for a wreath, and of course even with this stamp set you could use flowers if you like, but having used flowers on the last card, I decided I would do something a bit different, and I'm using instead the butterflies on the wreath. So I'm using those as my outer element of the wreath, and then I'm making another ring within that using the bees, and the bees have just enough space, their wings are touching. Again, I'm going to use my Spectrum Noir Illustrator markers to colour in the bees, just very quickly adding some yellows to their bodies. Then I'll colour the butterflies as well. I'm using a very dark blue for their bodies and just putting that down the centre. And then I'm going to use a green for the wings. I didn't really bother with putting too much shading here. I also added dots to their wings with that same dark blue that I'd used for their bodies. And then I took a white gel pen to add detail onto the wings of the butterflies. And I also used the white gel pen to add highlights down the bees' bodies. Going back to the Quirky Sentiments stamp set, I chose the Thank You sentiment because that fit very nicely in the centre of my wreath. I hadn't planned it, but it worked out very nicely, and I used Altenew Dusk ink for that. Looking at it when I edited this video, I actually really liked the way it looked, but at the time I wasn't so keen, so I thought I'd add some extra interest to the letters by drawing kind of down the centre of each letter, following the shape of it using a white gel pen, which just added some dimension to them. I then stuck my wreath onto a white card base and I have popped it up with foam tape. Again, I'm going to bring in some Nuvo drops to add some extra interest to this card. It does take me a while to decide exactly where I want these Nuvo drops. I'm using the Limoncello ones again here, which I used on the first card as well. When placing Nuvo drops, I always try to create a visual triangle with them and work in odd numbers. So I've put a cluster of 3 up to the top left, and then I've come across from that and done just 1, and then across again, creating a triangle from the other 2, and I will add 2 here. That's how I usually do them. I'll do a 3, a 1 and a 2. So that completes card number 4. This is the first one that wasn't a 1-layer card. For technique number 5, I'm going to be creating a random pattern. This time I'm again working directly on my card base, and I'm starting with the little flower stamps, both the outlines and the solid ones, and I will also go in with the leaf and fill that out. I did use my buoyant folder just as a tool to help me keep the card from popping open whilst I was stamping. I coated the stamping with Love from Lizzie Ivory Pearl embossing powder, which gives a really nice tone-on-tone look, and I will heat set that with my new Wow heat gun. Originally I stamped my sentiment directly on the card base and heat embossed it in white, but I didn't like how it looked, so instead I stamped it again with Hero Arts Butterbar ink onto a snippet of white and popped that up on foam tape over the one that had gone wrong. The white seemed a bit stark with all the other colours, so to help pull it in a bit more and to add more interest to my background pattern, I'm adding dots of that Simply White Nuvo drop all over the card base, and that completes technique number 5. So then we will be moving on to the 6th and final technique, and this is turnabout stamping. You can use your small stamps to do turnabout stamping. I created a video, I think a bit over a year ago now, showing how I came up with a technique to make your own turnabout stamps using your small stamps, and I will link to that in the top right hand corner. I have refined the technique a bit since then, so if you'd be interested in an updated video, let me know. But I basically followed pretty much the same technique that I showed in the other video and used several of the stamps from the stamp set to create my turnabout background, which I stamped with some Simon Says Stamp inks. And all the products I have used are, as always, linked in the description box below. I added Love from Lizzie peel-offs in black glitter on either side of the card and finished off by adding my sentiment, which completed my 6th and final card showing these techniques. And here's another look at all 6 of the cards I created. I hope you enjoyed this video and that maybe you learned something new. I would love it if you let me know in the comments below which of these cards was your favourite, which of these techniques have you tried, and perhaps if you have another way that you like to use small stamps, maybe you could let me know, because I'm always interested in finding new ways to use my stamps. If you did like this video, I would appreciate it if you could press the thumbs up button to let me and YouTube know that you enjoyed it. There are a couple of other videos on screen if you'd like to see more from me right now. Otherwise, you can press the subscribe button that's also on screen and you'll be alerted every time I post a new video. I'm hoping to post a video every day in July, so make sure you don't miss out on that. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again next time. Bye!